Hi, welcome to Fiberchats. My name is Irina. I'm the host, and my guests today, Matt and Mark. Hi, guys.
Hello, how are you
Hello.
doing?
So you are the owners of the company called Jamo. Like, is there meaning for that behind that name?
Jamo, it's Jammu Design,
Okay.
and Jameson is my surname, and obviously my nickname is Jamo, which comes from when I started working in a place in Australia. There was 5 marks, so they had to differentiate, and I just got called Jamo, and that's stuck ever since. And even at work, everybody knows me as Jamo. Even the high bosses know me as Jamo. So it was just natural that we called the company Jammu Designs.
Right. Well, you know what blew my mind? Like, you basically new to knitting relatively, right? Like, you started 2018, and
Yes.
here you are with like booming business. Like, how did that go from like learning your first 20 rows of knitting and 20 rows of purling to opening the business? Like, tell me that journey.
Well, you've probably got to know me. I don't do anything by half. So when I launch into something, I launch into something. And I always remember a friend said to us when I went back to work, because I used to work fly in, fly out. And I went back to work, oh, I've started knitting. And a comment was, oh, well, that'll last 3 months. And it was the creativity. I started knitting because I was ill, and I was bored. I had to basically rest and just watch the telly, which is not me at all. I took 2 Lego models apart, which you'll see the background and all over the house, and put them back together, and I had no more to do, and I was absolutely bored stiff. And a good friend, and who's turned into my knitting mentor, was feeding me. She lived about 1 kilometre away from me, and I went up and I said, I'm bored. And she says, I'll teach you to knit. And I says, I'll come back tomorrow. And that was where the 20 lines of purl and the 20 lines of knit came in. And then I said, I want to knit a beanie. So she cast it on, and I knit a beanie. And then I said, I want to knit another one. So I would say over the space of the first 3 months, the amount of times that kilometre was travelled between my house and her house was immense. And the favourite saying would be, what does it look like, Mark? It would be cat vomit. And it used to get chucked at the wall and everything like that. When I think back now, you know, and for me, it's not so much the end product, it's how you get to the end product. It's that challenge of, you know, I look at a stitch pattern and how do you decrease that to make a beanie? Because nobody tells you that. They tell you how to do the actual stitch pattern, but nobody tells you how to decrease it. Right. So that's the side that I love. It's the
troubleshooting.
Yeah, the maths, the making it work, the
like solving a puzzle.
Yeah.
Is that like similar to Lego in a sense for you? Like,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, when you come from not knowing anything about knitting, and then you start to look into it, you realize how much engineering is actually kind of involved in this sort of thing. It's actually really complex. And I sort of think there's 2 kind of types of knitters. Most people start off following a pattern, and it's one thing to be able to follow a pattern, it's another thing to understand what you're doing. And I think because of the way Mark's brain works, he very quickly understands what's happening with the stitches, as opposed to just following an instruction one after the other. He can understand that, okay, well, by doing this, this is what's causing the cable to happen. I can now understand how to make any kind of cable I want, because he can just apply that formula to what he wants to do. And so his mind's really good in terms of engineering and being an architect of a design. One of the reasons why Mark's really taken to it like a fish to water is because his brain's kind of wired that way to understand the kind of mechanics and the maths to it. There's a lot of maths to knitting.
right.
The numbers, the counting and the dividing of rows, and and it all needs to be quite precise. You can't just sort of fudge it as you go.
We have it sorted in our house. I'll be sitting knitting and Matt will ask a question. I'll just go 8, 9, 10, 11. Don't talk to me right now because I'm in the middle.
And I'll start going 46, 12, 8, 9.
So to continue your question, so then me and Matt started living together, and obviously I had all these finished beanies and around the sun, and he goes, and I'm always my worst critic. I always say I'm nothing special. I can do what everybody else does and everything like that. And Matt said, this stuff is really good. I think we should do something with it. So he was the propagation for Jammu Designs.
I was more concerned that we were going to drown in knitwear. There were piles and piles of things just in cupboards, and the wool stash was starting to grow and grow and grow. And yeah, and so there were a few things. I sort of said, well, you're going to have to start selling things if you're going to keep doing it as a full-time hobby. And otherwise it's just going to get out of control. And so we made a website and we started looking into doing markets.
He made a website.
Yeah, well, Mark's been doing a lot of work on it. There's a lot of hours required to get the content looking good. And then of course social media, and we talk to other people who've done markets, and there's a local community centre that does a beanie festival every year. And so we've kind of just started to explore all the avenues that you have to do when you start to become a marketer. And but yeah, so I said we had to sell things, and I've also kind of said, well, you need to put things on display. So if you look at our home, which I don't know, you might send you some photos afterwards, but we put ourselves out on display. So the things that we do, I'm a gardener, so the house is full of plants. Mark likes his Lego, so they're all on display. We've got our wool stash that's beautifully laid out like your own behind you, so that you can see it. And so when somebody walks into our house, there's no mistaking who we are as people, because it's all on display. Because there's nothing worse than having cupboards full of things that you can't find because they're all hidden behind each other. So that was kind of part of it. It's kind of living your hobby in a sense.
Well, you told me that you had 2 rules for Mark to follow in the business. And one of those rules was no orders, no taking custom orders. Like, why is that? Why?
Well, I think I can answer that one. When I started the business first off, I took a few orders, and I always remember this one, and it was taken at a market, and it was, oh, I love these blankets. I would like one in the local football team's colours. So I started asking what they wanted and everything like that, and trying to get the information out of people what they actually want is so hard. And so eventually I done what I thought she wanted, and spent God knows how long on this blanket making it. And the pressure of actually getting it done, because just keep telling, how's the blanket going and everything like that. No, I'm getting there. And then getting to the actual, and she came to pick it up, and I knew by her face it wasn't what she wanted, but she hadn't portrayed what she wanted. So what we say to people now is they come, oh, I love that hat, I'd like it in blue. I'll say, well, watch the website, you never know. So I'll keep it in my mind and think, I'll do a blue one of them if I want to. I have taken a few special orders. I was very honoured once, and it was more, I took the order because it was so special that through a person at work, they asked me to knit their daughter's garter for her wedding in blue. So it was a challenge on how to knit a garter and how to make it work. But we did, and it was all done with, and we knitted lace and everything and put the elastic in and everything, and that went, yeah, I got some nice pictures back of that one. And the same lady also asked me to make her a blanket. And it started off, she wanted a koala, and I says, there's no way I could do that. And oh, she wanted something like this, but in a koala. And I said, I can't do that for a newborn baby because we can't test them. And I know it's going to a baby, so I can't really do that. Plus, these are weighted, more like doorsteps.
Right.
So I said, how about I do a blanket? And she said, okay. She says, but make it look like a koala. So I did. I put a hood on it, I put ears on it and everything like that, and then got pictures of the newborn wrapped up in this koala blanket with a hood on it. So we do the odd thing, but if you notice there, it's something different that I've done when I've done it.
What was the second rule?
Oh,
Enjoy it.
sorry?
Got to enjoy it.
You have to enjoy it. Yeah, it has to be something that you love doing, and I think you'll keep doing it if it's something that you enjoy. If you're doing an order and you're doing a repeat of something you've done before, especially if it's a popular item and you're doing one over and over and over again, it just becomes, especially when you're working full time and you come home and you know you've got to do 4 of the same beanie to get done by, you know, a certain date so you can post them out. It's, yeah, soul destroying, I think, for a hobbyist or a craft person to feel like I can't do my creative thing until I've done my chores. And yeah, so that's the other rule. But and that's kind of been working because excuse me. So Mark's always inspired by the next project, and that's what motivates him to keep going. And it means when we go to our markets, that we've always got something different that people won't see anywhere else.
Let me ask you something. So you doing what brings you joy, but on the other hand, you're selling it at the market, and so you have to sort of take in consideration what would sell, how much you can sell it for, and all that stuff. Does that ever contradict your rule of enjoying?
Nope. Basically, I don't price it. I work out how much it's cost until it's finished. So I'll make something, and we've now understood, because at first it was sort of, oh my God, I can't charge that for something that I've made. And you realize that no, that's not the case. You know, if somebody realizes how much love and everything has been put into it and what it's made of and understand what it's made of, they'll actually pay for it.
Yeah, I think initially you think, oh, we can buy a beanie for $20 from, you know, any old store. Why should I be charging, you know, $45 for something? And it's obvious because it's a premium wool, or it's handmade. It's made uniquely, and so there really is a distinction between a handmade market product than from something that's mass produced. And you just have to accept that yes, people will. Not everybody wants to pay the lowest price for a piece of clothing.
Well, we did make the mistake at first. The first sort of business model that we had was low-cost beanies, all in acrylic, because we thought this is what people want, cheap beanies. And people were coming to the store and saying, have you got any pure wool?
Every person who came along said, oh, I need natural fibers, you know, and or have you got anything that's, you know, a bit more special? And oh no, this is what we've done. And so yeah, that was a mistake to start with.
Let's talk about your yarn stash then. How did that change from day one to what is it today?
Just got bigger.
Well, no, we also every time we travel, we'll look for yarn stores, because and especially looking for things that are one-offs or local hand spun wool, just things that are a bit different. And so we've got different sections. We've got an acrylic section, we've got a wool section, we've got a local Australian made, 100% Australian made and spun wool section as well. So we've got different ranges, product ranges based on the wool types.
I do have OCD.
In
really
organizing
organised well.
or yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so Matt, you also knit, right? Like,
Well, I haven't actually done a lot of knitting. I learned to knit first, and I knit a beanie, and I started knitting a jumper, which I never finished because it was actually quite hard. But really what I did was I started helping Mark with crocheting toys, because it turned out that they were a lot of work. So, and in crochet, you can do one project between two people because of the parts, and you stick them together at the end. And so I became the guy who just helped making components, and then at the end, because I had the patience to do it, I would be stitching things together at the end and sewing them up. And
on that note, I'll just show you, this is what we once made on a holiday to keep us bored.
to keep us from being bored.
that must have taken a while.
Drag.
It took a holiday.
You did that in one day.
No, on a holiday.
A couple of weeks, yeah.
That's
But since then, I've just been trying to learn more and more different techniques with crochet, and I think my latest thing's here, which is just a scarf, but it's the first scarf I've ever done, and so it's a nice kind of
beautiful. It's like it looks almost 3D. It has this 3D effect.
yeah, to it. And so
Ferrule as well.
I also done ferrule as well. I'm doing ferrule patterns as well.
That's cool.
And just working things out myself. Crochet is kind of good because you can fudge things a little bit. If you're halfway through a project and something's not quite working, you can just sort of, oh, I've got too many stitches. I'll just tuck a few away here, and no one will notice. And you can get away with a lot more than you can with knitting. So that kind of suits my personality as well, because I'm not as good with numbers and precision as Mark is.
Well, talking about that, right? Like Mark told me that you not only helped him with all the business side of it and building the website, because you're a software engineer and you know what you're doing there, and but you also encouraged him and gave him confidence to get into that business. What do you think Mark gave you? Like, what did you learn from him?
A lot of headaches.
No, it's a good question. I think one of the things that I struggle with is completing projects, because I'm a very creative person as well. I like to do lots of different creative things, and I actually did art classes years and years ago deliberately to help me learn to be patient, because you can't really be an artist if you're rushing to the end. And so just one of the things that Mark will do is he'll just sit and knit, and he's not rushing, he's not worried about the outcome, he's just doing the knitting to be relaxed. And he'll tell me when he's stressed from work, he'll come home and he'll do knitting because he can count, and counting is relaxing. And it's not that he's particularly concerned about getting a finished product, he's in the moment just counting. And I think that's a nice thing, to just sit and do your project without mindfulness of being finished, if that makes any sense. I think everybody wants to see what happens at the end. And sometimes if you're doing something new, you might be a bit impatient with it. But I think it's one of the age-old kind of tropes of knitting, is that you do it to relax. And that people of all ages from all times have sat and knit in a chair, and it's been a relaxing thing for them. So I think that's been something good for me that I've learned, is to not treat it as an art project that I have to try and complete, but just sit and do one step after the other, and then eventually it happens of its own accord.
I think Matt will agree when we say, we've always said Matt's the captain, but I'm definitely the engine room.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the one that, you know, it'll be, you know, oh, I need this done on the website. Yeah. And then a week later, I need that done on the website. I need that done on the website. And, you know, so I'll, you know, I'm a very, I would say, impatient. You know, if something's done, I'll want it done there and then, and I'll do it. So I am the engine room.
I get there eventually. But you'll also, for guidance, you'll come to me and say, oh, what color should I use for this? Is this going to match with this color? Should I use this pattern? And so you're always sort of asking for input on design kind of options as well.
We bounce off each other a lot. We went through a process of designing our bottle socks, which are sort of these, which are knitted.
And the reason for those was that we were advised to have different price range items on the market stall, to have something in the sort of, you know, $10 range, $20 range, 40, 80. And so that when somebody comes to the stall, often people just want to buy something. And the gift sock was that we thought was well, Mark came up with the idea, was a really good idea to have a reusable gift packaging. It could even be washed. And the person who is gifted it can then reuse it again and again for each person who, you know, it flows on and travels as somebody re-gifts it to somebody else.
Do you think when people buy from you, like at the market, when they come to your booth, do they buy because they fascinated with what you make, or do they buy because of you, your personality? Like, what do you think draws them?
Oh, our personality, of course.
I think there's definitely an element of, like, Mark's a very good salesman, and you can sort of tell from his personality that he's a real people person. And so there is that element. But of course, we distinguish ourselves a couple of different ways. We try to do unique items, so people will look through the stock and it'll be something that catch somebody's eye almost always. And the other thing is that a lot of markets, and I'm assuming this is the same all around the world, cater mostly to women in terms of fashion items. So if you go to a market and there's clothing, it's mostly women's clothes, and that's which is fine. But if a woman is shopping for a partner, a male partner, or, you know, dad or whatever, they find it they don't have a lot of options. And also when they bring their male partners along to the markets, they're standing around looking for something that they want to look at, but there's nothing for them. And not to say that there's never anything for men at markets. It's just the majority of stuff is generally geared towards women, that, in our experience anyway, the markets that we've been to. And so we specifically make things in men's colors, men's kind of textures, and giving them more options. And we do things for women as well, but we make sure that we're very conscious of having things that are kind of the men palette, which is kind of black, blue, brown, grey sort of color schemes.
Go on, see what you really mean.
The boring stuff.
Well, when you started the business, right, the first, let's say, few months, was it difficult? Like, was it a learning process from you, or was it like immediately met with success?
It's not immediate whatsoever. And I think that's a message that I would want to give to anybody that wanted to do a similar thing with their business. If they expected to have returns and everything within the first 12 months, you're dreaming. You're not. It's a very, very slow process. We probably said 5 years before it's probably anywhere near self-sustaining. It actually turns a profit now, but we're in year 3. But it's a very small profit. It supports itself where we don't have to buy yarn ourselves. It supports that, but we've not mentioned the 3 knitting machines, the embroidery machine, everything like that. You know, it's had
2 sewing machines.
2 sewing machines, yes. So it hasn't bought anything like that. But, you know, we can go and buy yarn and it doesn't cost us a penny. but the business owes us a lot of money, as any business would when you started off. But yeah, it's not overnight. You've got to work at it. It's a lot of work. I've sort of got to the stage now that Saturday morning, anything we've produced over the week, Saturday morning is the morning that I take pictures, I log it all, what materials have been used, because you've got to for your tax and everything like that, and log it all, how much it's cost, do the labels, put it on the website. And I might just have 4 beanies that we've made through the week, and that could take me half a morning. Get it on social media. It's a lot of work. So, you know, if somebody thinks, oh, I've knit all these products, I'm just going to make an online store and everything like that, it's not an easy job. It takes a lot of work. And if you, like I said, if you want something that's going to give you revenue back in 3 months, it ain't going to happen. You've got to have the eyesight that it's, you know, you're going to talk 3-4 years at least before you're getting that money back, unless you've got a really, really niche market that everybody wants,
where the product takes 5 minutes to make and you can charge a premium price. Yeah, yeah.
Well, I mean, are you ever frustrated that instead of knitting something for yourself, you have to make it now for the business and sell it?
I often sort of say that, you know, oh, I haven't actually knit myself a beanie. But Matt's made me some beanies, and that means more to me because they were made with love. And I've knit Matt beanies normally after the markets, which we usually, our last one's usually June, because it's pointless trying to sell beanies in the summer. And remember, wear the opposite way on to use. That's sort of our downtime, and then we'll start playing with different ideas. People do look at me silly on the train when I'm knitting a beanie and it's 42 degrees outside, but we've got to basically start making beanies straight away for the next year's stock, and obviously keep the website fresh as well, as that's going. But yes, I do get some funny looks.
There's something nice about knowing that you can produce almost anything that you want to produce. So if you, for example, wanted to have a special scarf or beanie or something to wear to an event to match your outfit, you could just whip one up, and it's kind of a nice feeling to know that you have that sort of skill already sussed at any point in time. So while we don't produce a lot of stuff for ourselves, if we wanted to, we could do it at any point.
Well, is there like any item that either one of you made that is not for sale? It just stays in the family?
Well, I think the shadow knitting portrait of me is probably not for sale, not just because it's a milestone achievement, but people generally don't buy portraits of other people. Do you want to grab that? And that's going to be on the wall forever, I think. And
I don't know how this is going to show up on the actual.
It's actually really nice. It does. Well, let's talk about shadow knitting. How did that become one of your interests? Because that's not a beanie. This takes forever to transfer from, like, take a portrait, transfer it into the program that would create that chart, right? And it has to basically, like, this the shadow knitting, as far as I understand, because I've never done it, I just seen it. If you walk around it, you see different sort of image. It changes as you like.
Visible, should be invisible from front on, and then as you walk to the side. So it's a really good piece of artwork to have in, say, a corridor. So you're walking down the corridor, you see the picture, and then once you're standing in front of the picture, it disappears. So it's kind of an interesting feature.
Well, I've seen it online. There's and it's awful. I can't remember the lady's name who does some of the patterns for the shawls. And I've seen the owl shawl, which I done by hand. And this took me 9 weeks to do.
right way up.
That way. So that was 9 weeks. I think about.
Yeah, you can see that quite clearly. Yeah.
So, yeah, so that took a lot of doing, and of course, with having the commercial head on, I couldn't put a price on that to sell it on the stall, not when it takes you 9 weeks, and you can't do anything else while it's doing. And of course, then my challenge head come on. So I've got a knitting machine there. I've got what you call a garter carriage, which, if anybody knows a knitting machine, when you're just using a knitting machine normally, it just knits stockinette stitch. You can't knit garter stitch on a knitting machine unless you hand manipulate the stitches or you've got one of these garter carriages. Lo and behold, I bought one. But you've got to tell the machine when to knit and when to purl, basically, just as you do with your hands. So then I went down well, how can I get this image and how can I get it onto the knitting machine and everything like that. So I would say it took me a good 6 months. And I'm sorry, it's a close guarded secret at the moment, because I thought loads of people would have done it. We found out that it's pretty unique, that nobody else has actually put it onto the knitting machine. So it's I do use Design and Knit. I use that program. I sit for hours telling it which ones to knit and which ones to purl. Then I put it into the knitting machine and it knits away. And yes, and they often hear swearing coming from the room, because with a knitting machine, if it mucks it up, you've usually got to start again. I've got to row 600 and have to start again.
Oh. Well, I mean, there is like this reputation sort of knitting machines that it's not hand knit, that this is machine knit.
Don't
right?
get me started.
Well, I actually wanna, because I interviewed Juan from Knitting Garage, and this is what he does. He does both knitting by hands and he does brilliant machine knitting. And we had this whole discussion of how, like, even if you knit with machine, it's still basically like you are the one who have to be constantly there. And some things takes even longer with machine than they would take with hand knitting. So what's your relationship? Like when you hear somebody tell you that's not handmade, like what's your reaction?
I've learned now to not get annoyed, because yes, and I just to explain, I always know, if you paint with your finger, it's called a painting. If you paint with a brush, it's still called a painting. If you paint with a airbrush machine that's powered by a generator motor, it's still called a painting. So why is it not called knitting? You know, and I'll just show for example. I actually just finished this, which is one of my I call them barfs. So it's a beanie scarf. And just for example, in this, obviously there's a lot of reduction. And in my beanies, when I machine knit them, I do a full fashioned decrease. I don't just decrease on the side. Now, the first decrease I do is there's 180 stitches on the machine. So I reduce that by 10 stitches. But to do that, I actually have to move the stitches. I worked it out before, 546 times by hand. Okay. Because when you decrease, you obviously make the holes. You've got to fill them holes in. It's not just like when you're hand knitting, you just knit two together. You've actually got to move all them, but you've got to move the first 18 in one, and then you've got to move the next 36 in one, and then you're moving them in one all the time. So it takes you longer to move all the stitches in than it does actually to knit the whole beanie. Okay. So what it does, it actually gives you a nice uniform fabric. So that is an advantage. It's quicker that way.
In the same way that a spray paint machine will fill in large areas, you're still painting a picture from your head. You're still designing yourself. You're still being creative yourself. It's just making a mundane task quicker.
Right.
And that's really all the knitting machine does. It takes vast passages of knit, which once you've mastered as a knitter, there's nothing really special beyond, you know, being able to knit 600 knit stitches is no more impressive than being able to knit 2 knit stitches. You know,
Have you ever
just
tried knitting, hand knitting, while you're machine knitting at the same time? Like, is that even possible?
No, it's not. Because basically, I touched on it before, if you make a mistake on a knitting machine, it is very, very, very hard to get it back. I'm getting better, I'm getting more skilled at it. And to me, it is, there is crossover, and that's one of the things for me is, I might hand knit something, I thought, oh, what if I can do this on the machine? And I'll try and do it on the machine. And sometimes you can do stuff on the machine and think, can you actually do that when you hand knit? And sometimes you can't. But it's a total different skill. And there's different skills that you learn when you're hand knitting, and there's different skills you learn when you're machine knitting. The two are, there are forms that produce the same thing at the end of the day, but they're total different skills. I'm on, obviously, different Facebook websites, and I'm on some machine knitting websites, and I see some of the items that they make, and I will say it puts mine to shame. They're, you know, absolutely amazing, and the amount of work and design that goes into them is a whole art form in itself. So I call myself knitting ambidextrous. I hand knit, which I love. I mean, I've got my latest beanie here. Most of my beanies, apart from the long beanies, are all hand knit, but there's no way. I have a rule when I hand knit, I will not hand knit anything 4-ply or lower. I will not waste my time hand knitting 4-ply. How long would that have taken to hand knit?
Right.
And as a business as well, I can't put that amount of time into hand knitting. An item like that, it would probably take me 6-7 weeks to knit something like that, and that is not cost effective.
Something interesting about knitting machines, when you talk to people about them, or if they see one in your house and they say, oh, my grandma's got one of those, you ask them about it and say, oh yeah, she had a go at it and it's just been sitting in the cupboard for 20-30 years. And I think that's very, very common. I think most of the knitting machines ever produced have been used once and then put in the back of a cupboard, because knitters realize very, very quickly they have to start from scratch to learn how to use a knitting machine, and it's not easy, and it's a big learning curve. And I think that's a really good distinction to make, that it's a completely different skill set.
Well, where do you think you are in the spectrum right now, and what's your ambition with knitting? Like, it's one thing to learn how to knit a beanie, right? And even design, like do fair isle variation or whatever variation. Are you ambitious in learning every technique that exists in knitting in both hand knits and machines? Like, where do you see yourself now, and where do you see yourself in the future?
I would say the journey is not preset, because again, we come down to that thing that there's got to be fun. So I might see something on a YouTube or a video or on a knitting forum in 3 months' time.
You might see somebody wearing something out and about and think, oh, that's really interesting. I want to go and look into doing something like that.
And I think that's what keeps it interesting. We don't have it. I don't say that, you know, in 6 months' time, I want to know every stitch and everything like that, because I know that's basically an impossibility, because, you know, I'm not going to go there. My mentor who taught me to knit said she did invent a monster, But I'm not going. It's got to be fun. It's like at the moment I'm practicing with helix knitting, and and first time I've really got into it, and I'm like, oh, this is quite nice. So it's another skill down there, and I love sitting down and starting with a beanie and sort of say, oh, well, I'm going to cast it on like this. So I'll cast it on and then do this, and then I'll get the, oh, I'm going to decrease it like this. And I'll actually design it as I'm knitting it, I won't sit and work it all out beforehand, do myself a pattern. If you see all the bits of paper that are dotted around the living room when I'm doing a beanie, because I'm trying to work out, oh, I should have had an extra 2 stitches in here. Oh, you can get away with that one. I'll put an extra 2 stitches in. And I think this beanie here, or beanie, hat, was literally knit like that. It was literally, I started with, oh, I fancy doing that with the brim. So I did that, and then I did the rim, and I thought, oh, that's just going to be boring knit. So then I put a ripple effect into the base and everything, into the body, and yeah, it just evolved. And to me, that's what's interesting. It's not a case of, I just want to have fun.
Have it ever been difficult for you to be a male knitter? Like, do people question you being male knitters?
I don't think it's difficult. I think it's people are interested in a positive way. They sort of think, oh, that's really good that you're knitting. People who are sort of experienced, knowledgeable knitters often will tell you that the very first knitting, like everything, was done by men, in the same way that, you hear stories about belly dancing was first originated by men. There was a lot of, many years ago, there were a lot of things women weren't allowed to do. And so the first knitting was really fish net making, and that then turned into fabric making from those fish net making skills. But then, like most things creative, women took it on and turned it into something that was a real art form. And so that's kind of a story that often comes up when people sort of say, oh, men don't normally knit. No, they kind of started it originally.
But got bored with it.
Got bored with it, and then women made it into a real thing. Obviously, it's really, the credit is to the women for making it into something quite spectacular. But it's, as I was saying before, there's 2 kind of mindsets to it. Is just a pure creative, I'm making something with my hands and following instructions, and there's also the design element. And I think more kind of engineering-minded guys would actually really enjoy the sort of technical creativity of knitting if they ever got the opportunity to do it. But I don't think anyone's ever sort of said, looked at you funny and said, "Oh,
I do get the odd one thing," because I knit everywhere that I can. So I commute back and forward to the city every day, which is a 45-minute train journey from where we live into Adelaide, and I knit on the train. There's 2 reasons why I do that. You can sit in a carriage, and 99% of people in the carriage are sitting looking at their mobile phones. You can't have a conversation about what's on somebody else's mobile phone. So what I've found is I get the early train, and I'll be sitting there knitting, and conversations will start because you've got something to talk about. And made some really, really good friends on the train. And, we've got a little group now, not knitters, but we talk to each other, and people say, oh, what are you making today? When I was making the shawl, the shadow knitting shawl, quite often I used to have to give them updates and stand up with the shawl and show the train where I was up to. And I get Instagram followers from I got one the other day. A young lad was sitting next to us and said, what are you making? I says, a beanie. He says, oh. Then we got on talking. He said, oh, what's your Instagram? So there was another follower I got. So I've always plugged in the business as well. But you do get the odd one that looks at you funny, you know. If you see me when I go to work, I've got a vest on with a handkerchief in and everything like that. So, and then you're sitting knitting, and yeah, I do get a few sly glances from certain people, but I even have school kids coming up and asking us, what you do and what you're making and everything like that. And being me, I'm quite happy to chat to them and tell them, and and I know I've actually inspired some people to get back into crocheting and knitting, think, oh, I used to do that years ago. And I will, and then next time I'll see them, oh, I picked up the needles again. I've done such and such and such and such, which for me is worth more than anything, because, I always say I've never slept so well since I started knitting, and never been as relaxed, apart from when I drop a stitch or anything like that. That's different. But yeah, it's an art form that's really good for people, and the more people I can transform into the art is much better, and it is an art.
No, it's fine. Like, I was interviewing Creative Sassy, and she said something that like stuck with me. She said that you don't know the ripple effect of like what you do, how it affects somebody, and by you knitting in public, like how you said like that you inspire some people and they like went back, you don't even know how many people you might have inspired to try something creative, something new, not necessarily knitting, but something that would bring them joy, So,
or even encourage them to come out the closet. They don't have to knit behind doors, they can knit on the train.
Right. Crazy idea. Well, talking about the way you go to work, I heard there was a Friday casual.
The kilt is quite famous. I actually have 5 of them. My name's Jameson. I'm Scottish heritage, from Stranraer in Scotland. So I have what we call utility kilts that I wear to work on a Friday. And it's actually got the stage now where sometimes, why haven't you got your kilt on? What's wrong? And then 2 Christmases ago, somebody bought me a very lovely gift, which was quite a few meters of Jameson tartan, and had it imported at God knows how much cost into Australia. And then we spent a long time trying to find somebody to make me a kilt, and I've actually got the Jameson tartan kilt that I wear for special occasions. And I often sometimes wear them for the markets as well, because you've got to have something to make you stand out from the rest.
Do you wear your knits to work?
Scarves and beanies, yes. I actually have a 3.5 meter scarf that I wear to work. It's
warm.
It's not always hot here. People think Australia's always hot. We're in Adelaide, and in the winter it gets quite cold. So you do need scarves and beanies.
Well, are people like ever expecting you to make them gifts? Like, is that ever sort of an implied, you enjoy it anyway, why won't you make me a hat?
Well, my kids would be horrified.
I've never felt that.
No.
That anybody expected a knitted gift. I think it's more cake. We do cakes as well. And I think if somebody has a special birthday coming up, I feel like there might be a bit of pressure to offer to make them a special cake. But no, I've never felt there's any kind of underlying sort of expectation to have a knitted product.
We do have friends that will say, oh, I need a present for somebody. Can I come and look through your stock and see what I can buy? So we have started, that is quite nice, that people look to us to buy gifts for their friends. We've got one that's quite often here, and she's buying different
especially
beanies.
For overseas
Yes.
gifts, because they aren't too heavy to post. It's a nice thing because it's made in Australia by, often with Australian wool. And so, yeah, people like that idea.
Well, let's talk about that greenhouse of yours where like every plant is taken care of. How did that passion start and what did it grow into?
In terms of my passion for plants, I I tell a story that when I was very young, I had two sisters, an older sister, younger sister, and I didn't really want to spend any time with me. So I had middle child syndrome. I spent a lot of time by myself, and I'd be outside a lot. And so I, just because kids do weird things with their imagination, I broke off branches from trees and I put them in the ground and just thought, oh, that's how you grow a tree. And sometimes they would grow because doing cuttings for plants, that's sometimes that's one of the propagation techniques, is to just do a cutting and put it in the ground. And when I saw that worked, I thought it was like magic that you could just make a tree by breaking a branch or putting it in the ground. And from a kid's point of view, it is very magical. And so really from that point onwards, I was really interested in anything to do with, you know, plants growing and propagating especially. And so probably there's a very, very long time where I didn't do anything with plants. But then when I was in my teens and early 20s, it sort of dawned on me that that's a career choice, is that you can be somebody who makes plants. And so I think that's when I really started to kind of look into sort of how plants work and understand sort of the biology of reproduction in plants and how it all works. And that is really kind of a magical thing. And it's almost a taps into your creative mindset as well, that in the same way that, you know, architecting a beanie, understanding how things work is kind of like an engineering principle. Is, you know, you can't just build a building, you have to understand all the science behind it. And so growing plants, to do it well, you have to understand the science behind it. And so all these sort of things tie in together. And it's the same with anything creative. With plants, probably the most creative version of growing plants is bonsai. And so it was a natural progression for me to start working with bonsai plants and to look at sort of use of negative space and composition. But also you're working with a living, breathing, sort of eating creature that changes constantly. So that's been a real kind of focus of mine the last couple of years as well.
Do they have names?
No, they don't. I think it's a bit of a...
There's not enough names.
Well, I think you don't want to get too attached because they can just die. And as much as you can be really great at looking after a plant, there's so many things that can make something just die. Or if you're busy for a few days and there's a heat wave, you know, you can lose a plant. So I wouldn't want to get too attached to anything in particular. And I think, like you were saying before about letting go of your products, if there's something that you make that you're really proud of and you've only got one of them, you might think, oh no, I can't sell that until I make another one. But you sort of have to let it go. And I think knowing that you've got that skill, it's a really nice feeling that you could travel with no luggage to anywhere in the world, walk into a wool shop, buy 2 needles and a ball of wool, and you can create something amazing. It's a thing you carry with you.
I mean, I see a lot of magic in your life because you create cake from just raw ingredients. You grow plants just out of little cuttings, and you create all the beautiful creations you do on your knitting machine and with 2 sticks and a ball of yarn. So it's like everything you do is very magical.
It does feel like that. You know, the thing is that Mark will sometimes create his own stitch, and I think probably sometimes it comes out of making a mistake, and you sort of think, oh, I'll keep doing that mistake because it looks interesting, and then you've created something that nobody else has ever seen before, and that's kind of a nice thing as well. And yeah, you're right, there's a sort of magical elements to just something appearing from nowhere. It's never been before, and using the knitting machine to produce the shadow knit artwork is, and then realizing that we don't think that anybody's ever done that before. It's kind of, well, okay, there's 9 billion people on the planet and no one's done this before. It's kind of, how does that happen?
And I also take a lot of inspiration from my dear sister, who was into so many different arts and crafts, was unbelievable. Her house was dedicated to crafting. You've never seen a crafting house like it in your life. Unfortunately, she passed away 5 years ago, before I actually started my crafting journey. So it's one of my biggest regrets in my life that I can't spend one day just with her to show her what I've done. But I always remember, and she was very ill and she was in hospice, and she was still delivering classes to people from a hospice on crafting. And I said to the nurse, I bet you've never seen a room like that for a long time. She says, we've never seen a room like this. There was sewing machines, there was needlework in one corner, there was painting in another, she was building a fairy, she was sending me out to get logs so she could make a fairy kingdom in the back garden for everybody else that visited the hospice. Very, very special lady. It was after she died, I got messages from all over the world on how she'd inspired people, and they've actually set a foundation up in her name, the Dawn Brown Foundation, to actually help artists who can't afford their own materials. And this is what the foundation's for. So I do take a lot of inspiration from her, and I will often finish something and say, oh, I wonder what Dawn would have thought with that. So that is a special moment for me, because I was never classed as the creative one. It was always my sister that was the creative one. Well, darling, I can do it now.
I'm sure she's very proud of you. I'm sure
Yes.
she was very pleased. Well, we're gonna put the information about that foundation and all the ways how to find you in the description of this video. And I wanna thank you for letting me into your little fairy tale world of magic. I really enjoyed getting to know you and chatting with you.
Likewise, thank you very much.
Thank you.